Good morning. I am Kim Mack, Special Assistant to the President for Governmental, Community, and College Affairs at Halifax Community College. I want to welcome all of you to our lecture today with U.S. Congressman G.K. Butterfield. This event is a part of our 2022 Cultural Learning and Universal Enrichment Series. As many of you already know, our president, Dr. Michael Elam, fifth president of Halifax Community College, passed away on January 25th. He was the president of our institution from February 1st, 2017 until his passing. Please bow your head in a moment of silence in memory of his life. Thank you. Several times a year, we have the opportunity to bring guest lecturers to Halifax Community College. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from our friend, Congressman G.K. Butterfield. Through the years, Congressman Butterfield has visited HCC, secured earmarked funding so we could have benefits like technology here on campus and nursing equipment to train our future nurses. Congressman Butterfield was here with us during the bereavement when Dr. Elam passed away, and we appreciate the support that he gave us and the Elam family. Will everyone please stand for the posting of the colors by Roanoke Rapids High School Junior ROTC, followed by the singing of Star Spangled Banner by Mr. Augustus Cofield, Minister of Music at First Baptist Church, Hodgestown Community, Roanoke Rapids. And now Mr. Augustus Cofield will sing Star Spangled Banner.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed had the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you, Roanoke Rapids High School Junior ROTC, for posting the colors. You may be seated. Also, we thank Mr. Cofield for singing the national anthem. Next, we will have greetings from the following: Michaela McNair, Northampton County Early College Senior and Student Ambassador; the Honorable Linda Brewer, a member of the Halifax Community College Board of Trustees and a Halifax County Board of Commissioners; and in the absence of the Honorable Charles Tyner, Chairman of the Northampton County Board of Commissioners, we have with us Reverend Franklin Williams, Director of Northampton County Economic Development.
Good morning. On behalf of the student body, we welcome you to our lecture series today with Congressman G.K. Butterfield. Halifax Community College is a place where learning comes to life in pursuit of excellence and where education is focused on you. Students here can reach their goals by learning a trade, earning a certificate, diploma, associate's degree, or transferring to a four-year college or university. Halifax Community College has been there for me and our community for 53 years. Thank you for attending today's ceremony.
They might ask me to leave. I can't even follow directions this morning. On behalf of the trustees of Halifax Community College, one of whom is here with me today, Ms. Joyce Buffalo, who also serves as a commissioner in Northampton County, I'm honored to welcome you all. And you're really in for a treat, because every single time I hear Congressman Butterfield speak, I learn something, believe it or not, at my old age. And the young lady referenced this college, I think, for 53 years. I may have been in one of those first classes, taking some courses at night while I worked for the federal government. And we are truly blessed to have this facility in our area. So welcome today, and sit back for some education. Thank you.
Good morning. It is such an honor to be here amongst such great people. We are happy on behalf of our Board of Commissioners in Northampton County and the chairman of our Board of Commissioners, Mr. Charles Tyner. One of our commissioners, Ms. Joyce Buffalo, is to my right, and I tried to get her to do this, but she told me she just wanted to enjoy. And we are in for a treat. Congressman Butterfield is such a wonderful historian, and he just brings out facts that are just little nuances. And I'm very much looking forward to this. You are certainly welcome to participate and have a good time and enjoy. Thank you for coming today. And on behalf of our county commissioners, God bless, and everyone, I'm telling you, let's pray like never before. We're in some perilous times, but I believe we're going to make it. God bless.
Thank you to everyone that gave greetings. I want to give a special recognition this morning to Michaela McNair. Michaela, will you please stand? Michaela is the district winner of the American Legion Oratorial Contest. So let's give her a round of applause. The U.S. Constitution. So she did an outstanding job, and we wish her all the best. You may be seated. Now would everyone please stand for the singing of Lift Every Voices Sing, our Negro National Anthem.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as a rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
You may be seated. Thank you, Mr. Cofield, for the musical selection of Lift Every Voice and Sing. Next, we will hear from Ms. Zanaya Battle, a senior with Northampton County Early College, and she will be coming to introduce our keynote speaker, Congressman G.K. Butterfield. And after her introduction, we will hear from our keynote speaker this morning. Good morning. Congressman Butterfield is a lifelong resident of Eastern North Carolina and a Wilson native. He has been serving as our congressman since July 20th, 2004, when he was elected in a special election. Congressman Butterfield earned his undergraduate and law degrees from North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina. An advocate for the law, civil rights, and notably voting rights, Congressman Butterfield's career accomplishments include the following: practicing law for 13 years in a law practice he founded, elected as a resident Superior Court judge where he presided over civil and criminal court cases in 46 North Carolina counties, and appointed by the governor to the North Carolina Supreme Court for 2 years. Congressman Butterfield has served on many committees in the Congress and held leadership posts in the Democratic leadership as Senior Chief Deputy Whip and the chair of Congressional Black Caucus during the 114th Congress. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Congressman Butterfield to the podium.
Wow, good morning. Let me thank you, Zanaya, for those very kind and articulate and kind words of introduction. It's good to see all of you this morning, and thank you for having me to come back to this very important campus on a very important occasion, actually a happy occasion. The last 2 times I've been here have been for sad occasions, but today it's a wonderful occasion, and so thank you so very much for the invitation. Let me just recognize the acting president of the college and thank you for making this venue available today, and thank you for stepping into some very big shoes. We We said farewell to Dr. Elam a few weeks ago, and this campus really suffered a great loss in the passing of Dr. Elam. But this campus will live. It will go on and do even greater things. Had a few moments ago to tour the automotive facility. I don't remember the exact name for it, but it's right across the parking lot. And let me tell you, Halifax Community College is not only great, but it is poised for even more greatness in the years to come. And so thank you for your incredible work. And what can I say about Kim Mack? I'm going to call her Dr. Kim Mack, Professor Kim Mack. Kim makes it happen. She makes it work. And thank you, Kim, for all that you mean to this college and to this community. And to Mr. Cofield, you have a beautiful voice, sir. I've been to your church on many occasions, and you know that, and your pastor and I are very good friends. But let me tell you, had you sung those 2 songs at the Super Bowl on Sunday, just maybe the Bengals might have won that game. But anyway, it was a good game, and I certainly enjoyed your music today. And to our commissioners, Commissioner Buffalo, Brewer, and Williams, it's good to see you, and just thank you for the work that you do on your Board of Commissioners. I know it's not easy work. Serving an elective office at the local level. Speaking of elective office, I think I see Judge Norland Graves over there. Is that you, Norland? Yes. Norland is a Superior Court judge who serves this county and serves with distinction. And Norland and I have been friends for many years since he was a much younger man. And I'm just so proud of him and to know that he is now sitting on the Superior Court bench here in this county. In my former life, I was a Superior Court judge. In fact, Commissioner Brewer, the last term of court that I had before going to Congress was in Halifax County. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in my chambers over in Halifax and got a call from the former Congressman, Congressman Balance, telling me that he was not going to seek re-election. We had thought that he was going to seek re-election, and he changed his mind on a Thursday afternoon. And the deadline for filing was the following day at 12 noon. And I got the news in the chambers there at the Halifax County Courthouse. And so I have great affection for this county. I've come to this county hundreds of times over the years. Not only did I hold my last term of court here, but when news reporters asked me in Washington to look back on my judicial career and just tell them some of the best cases and some of the worst cases that I had during my judicial career. And interestingly enough, the one that has the most humor was in Northampton County. Over in Seaboard, North Carolina, help me out, the former mayor of Seaboard, Pastor Broadnax, Melvin Broadnax. Melvin Broadnax was the mayor, and he was also working in town hall and making sure that all of those operations were going smoothly. And a disgruntled customer came in one day, African-American man came in one day and had a dispute with the clerk there in the town hall. And he was charged with disorderly conduct. He may have been charged with assault. And the case came to my courtroom. And I remember Melvin Broadnax getting on the witness stand that day and defending his town clerk, and rightfully so. And he defended his town clerk, and the jury deliberated for about 3 minutes and came back into the courtroom and found the gentleman guilty as charged. The most painful case that I had as judge over a 15-year period was here in Halifax County, where a young man who did not want to pay child support over in Scotland Neck slipped into the home of his girlfriend, with whom he had had 2 children by, and put rat poison, farm chemicals, dicystine was the name of the chemical, into the children's Kool-Aid. And when they came home from school that day and mama served spaghetti and meat sauce and Kool-Aid, you know the rest of the story. And the jury sentenced him to death. I don't know if it was ever carried out. I don't think it was, but he is certainly in prison at this moment. And so when I say I have an affinity with this region, I mean that sincerely. Let me add to that. When my mother began her teaching career many years ago, the first place she landed was Garysburg, and a Rosenwald School over in Garysburg, and she became a teacher there. And then her brother became the principal here at the Weldon School, the Ralph J. Bunch School. Before that, it was the Halifax County Training School. and he was the principal there in Weldon. And then my mother's sister was the teacher at Inborton School down in Enfield, and she was a very legendary teacher there at Inborton for many years. And her husband, I'll finish with this. Her husband was a pastor, had 2 churches in Northampton County, 2 churches in Halifax County, Mount Zion in Northampton County, and Cool Spring in Northampton County. And over in Halifax, it was over in Enfield, it was out in the country, it was Daniel's Chapel, and in Enfield, it was St. Paul. I got them all 4 right. I had 4 churches and pastored for 64 long years. And I love to tell the joke that every time my mama got mad with my daddy, she would pack me up and we would come to Enfield and spend a couple of days with her sister cooling off before she would go back home, and just have great, great, great affection. So thank you for letting me come by and say a few words today about Black History Month. Black history is a very important subject. It's being talked about all over the world, and it should be. Right here in Halifax County, you have a lot of history in Halifax County, and I hope when I finish this speech today, you will have a better appreciation for African-American history in Halifax County. You know, I met yesterday with a man in Raleigh who was from South Carolina, and he said that, you know, when they do business, they think of North and South Carolina together as a unit. So when I think of Halifax and Northampton County, I think of these 2 counties as a unit. Yes, you are separate governments, but you have a lot of commonality between your 2 counties. And so much of what I will talk about will pertain to both Halifax and Northampton County. Well, the story of African-American history does not begin and end with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I always like to begin these speeches by making that very important point. Yes, Dr. King was a very celebrated leader. Yes, he accomplished so much during his 13 years of leadership, but it does not begin and end with Dr. King. The African-American story, and let me recognize the Roanoke Rapids JROTC. I had it on my notes here and I forgot to make reference to them. You guys are very impressive. I saw the way you came onto this stage with precision, and just appreciate you. I'm an Army veteran, and I know how to come to attention, and I know how to salute and all of the other stuff, but I understand and thank you, and I encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. But back to the story of African-American history. 1619 is really when it began. And I don't have time to tell the story for 400 years this morning, but you must understand that this story begins in 1619 up in Virginia, when African slaves, and I will be in Africa on Saturday of this week. I will be in Liberia, Tanzania, Cote d'Ivoire, and Sierra Leone, which 3 of those 4 countries are on the west coast of Africa. Starting in 1619, African citizens were involuntarily forced onto slave ships and were brought to America. Not just to the United States of America, but they were transshipped to various parts of the world. But quite a number of those ended in the southern part of the United States of America. And it started in 1619. We were not even a country in 1619. We were colonies. 13 colonies. You remember that from high school. We were colonies. Did not become a country until 1776. When we became a country, one of the first things our founders had to do was to develop a constitution, which is the document that we must all live by and be governed by. And when the Constitution was debated in Philadelphia, there was a great dispute about slaves. How do you count the slaves? If you say that they are property and not necessarily human beings, do you count the slaves when you're determining how many Congress members are apportioned to each state? And the Southerners said, yes, you count the slaves. And the reason for that is because Southern states would get more representation in Congress. The Northerners said, no. If you don't consider these people citizens, then how are you going to count them? Why should you count them in determining the apportionment issue? And then there was a great compromise between the North and the South. And the compromise, well, tell you what, we'll compromise with you. When we take the census every 10 years, starting with the 1790 census, we're going to count each slave not as a full human being, but as 3/5 of a human being, 60% of a human being. Isn't that insane? But that was the compromise that was reached in Philadelphia as to the counting of slaves. And then there was another great debate in Philadelphia, and that was, well, do we keep slavery forever, or do we start winding down slavery? And there was fierce opposition on both sides of that issue. And so the compromise there was, let's delay this for 20 years. Let's delay this until 1808. That would be 20 years later. And let's come up with a deal that slavery cannot even be debated. It cannot even be discussed at all in Congress. It is a non-conversation in the Congress of the United States for at least 20 years. And that was the only way the Constitution could get passed in Philadelphia, to make those concessions on counting slaves as 3/5 of a person and delaying any debate on ending slavery for 20 years. Well, the Constitution emerged and it became the law of the land. So finally in 1808, when the 20 years expired, Northerners who believed that slavery was sinful and believing that it was tearing the country apart, believing that the country would never reach its potential with a system of slavery in the South, decided that they wanted to end slavery. They met fierce opposition. And so again, there was another compromise. The compromise here was that we will just, instead of ending slavery, we will stop slaves from coming into the country from Africa. It was called importation of slaves. We will at least stop the importation of slaves from Africa to the United States. But slaves that were already here were legally permitted to stay here. The owners of the slaves were permitted to continue to own them, and the slaves could multiply. The slaves could have their children, and those children could have children, and the slave population could continue to increase. And it did. So finally, around 1830, that was a very critical time in history. In 1830, there was another class of Black people. There was the slave class, where most Black people were included, but then there was a subclass of the Black community called free people of color. You had the slave population. You had a few people who had obtained their freedom. How did they obtain their freedom? Well, in some instances, the slave master decided that they were too old and they just decided to let them go and not have to take care of them. Others died and left it in their will that their slaves would be free at their death. Other slaves found some kind of way to find some money. I don't know how they did it, but they purchased their freedom. In other instances, white missionaries from the North came down to the South and befriended some of the slaves and used their money to purchase the freedom of some slaves. And so you had a population called free people of color. Many of those are right here in Halifax County. These free people of color did great things. They were becoming ministers of the gospel. They were starting businesses, and they were doing other great things in the community, but they were secretly teaching the slaves to read and write, giving them an education, teaching them how to think for themselves and to plan for their future. And so finally, when the word got out that the free people were teaching the slaves to read and write, they felt that that was very, very dangerous. And so the North Carolina legislature passed a law in 1830, and I'm going to read it to you. I printed it out last night. I'm going to read it to you because it speaks volumes. This is what the legislature said. It says, this is a bill preventing the teaching of slaves to read and write. Whereas the teaching of slaves to read and write has a tendency to excite dissatisfaction in their minds and to produce insurrection and rebellion to the manifest injury of the citizens of this state. Therefore, it is hereby enacted by the General Assembly that any person who shall teach or even attempt to teach any slave to read and write shall be liable for indictment. And upon conviction, here is the punishment, Judge. Here is the punishment. If it is a white person teaching a slave to read and write, they shall be fined not less than $100, no more than $200. They would have to pay some money. If it is a free person teaching a slave to read and write, the free person shall be punished as follows. He shall be whipped, not exceeding 39 lashes, nor less than 20 lashes. You know what a lash is? That's a lash with a belt. The punishment, if it's a free person teaching a slave to read and write, 20 to 39 lashes. If it is a slave teaching another slave to read and write, the punishment is worse. They don't get the right to a trial. They are carried before the justice of the peace. And if they are convicted, the slave shall be sentenced to receive a mandatory 39 lashes on his or her bare back. That was the punishment for teaching a slave to read and write. You see how powerful education is? They did not want the slave population to learn to think for themselves and to be educated. But they didn't stop there. They also were concerned about Black preachers. First Baptists, Black preachers. We have three First Baptist churches, three African-American First Baptist churches in Halifax County, maybe more, but I know about three. But they were concerned about Black ministers going about the community and teaching the Bible and teaching about salvation. So they wanted to put a stop to Black preachers. And so they passed another law that prevented the teaching and preaching to slave families. And so that was 1831. And that was a very difficult time. Up in Virginia, Nat Turner forced a rebellion there in Virginia and killed several of the slave masters. And so there was great fear among the plantation owners in the South that slavery was getting out of control, that these slaves were becoming restless and they wanted their freedom. And so they clamped down on slavery and made it even harder. Finally, in 1857, a case went to the United States Supreme Court to determine what the status of slaves were, what the status of free people were, whether they are to be considered as citizens or whether they have any rights whatsoever. It's called the Dred Scott versus Sanford case. And in 1857, I didn't bring the language with me, but basically what the 1857 case said was that Black people in America have no constitutional rights whatsoever. They have no rights that a white man or woman is obligated to respect. That was in 1857, the Dred Scott case. And now the country is really in turmoil. 1860 comes along. Abraham Lincoln from Illinois is running for president. The southern states are scared to death of Abraham Lincoln. They have this fear because they had looked at some of his prior speeches that he had made. They had a great fear that if Lincoln was elected president, that he would find some way to end slavery in the South, to find a way to free the 4 million slaves in the South. They were terrified of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln runs in 1860 and he wins the election. Southern states said, we're not going to accept it. We're not going to, what are we going to do? Lincoln's going to go to the White House and he's going to take away our slaves. What do we do? And their solution was, we're going to leave the United States. We're going to form a brand new country called the Confederate States of America. This is American history, y'all. I want you to listen to it. And I'm going to pull it all together at the end and tell you how great our country is, but this is from whence we have come. And so 11 southern states decided we're out of here. We're going to leave the Union. We're going to form this new country. We're going to elect a president and a vice president. We're going to stand up a military. We're going to create a currency. We're going to create a flag called the Confederate flag. We're going to do all of these things. We are through with the United States of America. We don't want any part of Lincoln, and we don't want them messing with our slaves. So they had their country. They tried to have a separate country. A civil war breaks out between the North and the South. It was a war that the South declared on the North because they disliked Lincoln and the direction in which he was taking the country. The war was raging. Men from Halifax County fought in the war on the side of the Confederacy. I suspect some on the side of the Union, but there was a brutal war. 1861, the battlefield was bloody. 1862, lives are being lost all across the South. Finally, in September of 1862, Lincoln is tired. He is worn. He feels somewhat responsible for this civil war and tens of thousands of men dying on the battlefield. And he came to the conclusion, the only way I'm going to bring this country back together is that I'm going to have to go ahead and end slavery. And his advisor said, well, Mr. President, how are you going to do that? He said, I'm going to tell you how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because I am not only the president, but I'm also the commander-in-chief of the military. Our military friends know that. It is the president who is the commander-in-chief of the military. Lincoln said, I may not have power as president, but I do have the power as commander-in-chief. Why? Because I'm head of the military, and our military is under assault. And if I go in and take away the slaves from these plantation owners, it will cripple the South, and it will cripple their ability to win the war. And so I have that power. Some said, Mr. President, no, you have a lot of power, but you don't have that much power. And he said, watch me. On September 22nd, 1862, Lincoln said to the Southern states, I have right here in my hand a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. I'm going to give you 100 days to come back into the Union, and let's figure this thing out. 100 days. And if you are not back in this Union by January 1st of 1863, I'm going to issue an order saying that the slaves in your states are free. I'm going to send the Union Army into the South, and we're going to set these slaves free. Now, Lincoln felt that he did not have the authority to end slavery in states that were not fighting against the Union. West Virginia, Maryland, 4 states. I don't recall all 4, but they were called the border states. He said, I don't have the power in the border states because they haven't declared war on the Union. But in those 11 states, including North Carolina, I'm going to set the slaves free. And he did. On January 1st, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, sent the troops into the South, and they started setting them free. The Army soldiers set up freedom schools and Sabbath schools and tried to start teaching the former slave children how to read and to write and to count. But then the great lawyers of that day said, President Lincoln, you have made a terrible mistake. You have exceeded your power. What happens when the war is over? Do these people go back into slavery? What happens if the U.S. Supreme Court says that you overstepped your authority? What happens then? And Lincoln said, well, you have a point. We're going to have to change the Constitution of the United States to make it absolutely clear. Lincoln is reelected November of 1864. The first thing Abraham Lincoln did was to clear up the legality of the end of slavery. He demanded that Congress pass the 13th Amendment. Congress passed it on January 31st, 1865. And here's the way it read. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. One sentence, the 13th Amendment. But under the law, you cannot amend the Constitution, Congress cannot, without 3/4 of the states ratifying the amendment. So Lincoln had to send this thing around. There were 36 states at the time, which meant that 27 states had to approve of this amendment. So it went to the first state, which is Illinois. They approved it. Went down to Missouri. They approved it. And it started going around to the different states. But Lincoln didn't live to see the conclusion. On April 14th, April 15th of 1865, Lincoln was killed. He was assassinated, and a man named Andrew Johnson becomes president. But finally, on December 6th, December 4th of 1865, North Carolina ratified the 13th Amendment. And 2 days later, on December 6th, the state of Georgia ratified the amendment. When the amendment was ratified by Georgia, 4 million slaves become free. That is one of the most important dates in American history. December 6, 1865 is the day that 4 million slaves obtained their freedom. Those of you who are African American, I'm talking about our ancestors. I'm talking about our grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents. They obtained their freedom. Right here in Halifax County, 10,349. Not 1,000, 10,349. Northampton County, 6,804. In Warren County, 10,400. And the list goes on and on and on. Within 60 miles of where we're sitting right now, there was nearly 100,000 slaves. I want you to process that for a minute. 100,000 slaves within 60 miles of where we sit right now. The epicenter of this was right here in Halifax County. Halifax County had one of the largest number of slaves, but also one of the largest number of free people. And African Americans started buying up land in Halifax County. There were literally hundreds of African American farmers right here in Halifax and Northampton County who bought up the land and became farmers. And that was a glorious period. But then there was also criticism from the opposition. Well, they may be free, but they're not citizens. Because the Dred Scott case back in 1857 said they weren't citizens. And we've got to follow the law of the land. And Congress said, okay, we've got to deal with that. Here we go. And so then Congress passed a 14th Amendment. And this amendment says all persons, they had to do some political compromising here. They didn't say black people. They just said all persons who are born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States, and they're citizens of the state wherein they reside. So that is the 14th Amendment, and 3/4 of the states ratified the 14th Amendment. And now these 11 Southern states want to come back into the Union and be a part of the United States and her prosperity. And the condition was for them to come back into the country. There were many conditions, but one condition was that they had to change their state constitution to add the 14th Amendment to their constitution, so that it will be clear that the citizens of each state, that the people of each state are indeed citizens of the state, and it happened. Some states kicked and screamed about it, but finally all of the 11 Southern states changed their constitution to include the 14th Amendment. And then the opposition said, well, they may be citizens, they may be free, but guess what? They don't have the right to vote. And the Union side of the argument was, absolutely, they have a right to vote. They're citizens. What do you mean they don't have the right to vote? So then Congress goes back to work again. This time they had to add a 15th Amendment. Told you about the 13th, the 14th. Now we're at the 15th Amendment to the Constitution. And this amendment says the right of citizens to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude That was the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment went around to the states, it got ratified, and now it becomes the law of the land. Now, I drug all of this out and slowed down long enough for you to think about it as I talk about it, for you to understand the four corners of the legal argument of where we were during Reconstruction. And always remember that these Reconstruction amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, lay the foundation for the great democracy that we have today. And so African Americans started building their communities. Oh, did they start building? They built churches. You go to many churches here in Halifax and Northampton County, and you look at the cornerstone on the church. I don't remember Cool Spring and Mount Zion and other churches in Northampton, but 1860s, 1870s, those churches were founded. First Baptist Weldon, 1865 or 1866. Churches started springing up all across North Carolina. But attached to the church, many of these churches, was a little schoolhouse. It's incredible how these churches were not only intent on teaching the love of Christ, but also intent on educating the slave children. So they would build these little schools next to the church. And that was a glorious period. But then the former slaves said, well, we need to vote. Women couldn't vote during those days, ladies and gentlemen, whether they were black or white. It was a male suffrage thing. Only males could vote, 21 years of age or older. And so black men became registered voters. And here in Halifax County, it's reported that more than 85% of African-American men who were eligible to register to vote, registered to vote, and nearly 100% of those voted in every election. And so Halifax County was part of the 2nd Congressional District. The other counties were Northampton and Hereford and Bertie and Wilson and Edgecombe, and it goes right on down the line, Greene County. This was the 2nd Congressional District. And so when they looked at the data, there were more African-American men voting, eligible to vote in the district than white men. And so African-Americans said, well, we can elect a member of Congress. And so John Hyman from Warren County, next door, said, I'm going to run for Congress. He wins. He serves in Congress. A few years later, a black lawyer from Enfield, you know where that is, Enfield, decided he wanted to run for Congress. His name was James Edward O'Hara. O'Hara runs, and he wins. And he is the congressman for the 2nd Congressional District. And then years later, a man from Vance County, Granville County, Henry Plummer Cheatham, black man, ran, became the congressman for this district. And then finally in 1896, a man named George H. White ran and became the congressman. So we had 4 African-American Congress members during the period of Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction, all the way up to the year 1900. But right here in Halifax County, the chairman of the board of the county commissioners in Halifax County was African-American. Don't know about Northampton County, I gotta research that. But the chairman of the board in Halifax County was African-American. And so there was a lot of activity in this county, and there's so much that you can be proud of. But finally in 1900, the Ku Klux Klan had tried all that they could to stop African-Americans from voting. They tried, but they failed. They went into Wilmington and killed 11 African-American leaders in Wilmington in what is called the Wilmington Race Riot. That did not stop African-Americans from voting. So finally in 1900, the legislature came back again. That same legislature from years earlier came back and passed another brand new law called the literacy test. And here's what it says. Every person presenting himself for registration shall be able to read and write any section of the Constitution in the English language. And what they didn't put here was, and satisfy the registrar that you're literate. And so in 1900, all of the voters, black and white, were kicked off of the voter registration rolls. And when the citizens came back to re-register, white voters White citizens were allowed to re-register. Black citizens were denied the right to re-register, using the literacy test as the reason for denying them the right to register. And because of that, nearly every African American who had participated in every election over the last 30 years had been kicked off of the voter registration rolls and no longer eligible to vote in the election. Then the question became, well, what about white citizens who are illiterate? What do we do about them? And the legislature passed a law that says there will be an exception. We will call it the grandfather clause, because if that citizen can prove that his grandfather voted before the year 1860, then he will be given an exception and allowed to vote. So starting in 1900, African Americans did not participate in the political process in Halifax County. What did they do? They were not defeated. They said, well, if we're not going to be able to vote and get people elected, guess what? We're going to educate our children, and we're going to try to make them the best human beings that they can possibly be. We're going to give them the best education we can give them. We're going to build schools, and we're going to get Booker T. Washington to come in here, and he's going to get Julius Rosenwald to come in here. We're going to build schools all across North Carolina. We're going to educate our children, and we're going to send them to Elizabeth City State University. It was called a different name then. We're going to send them to Shaw University and St. Augustine, and we're going to send them to Federal State. We're going to send them to our HBCUs, and we're going to make them great men and women. And many of them are going to come back home, and they're going to teach, and they're going to go into the public schools, and they're going to teach little children to become productive. And then they're going to become presidents of community colleges and principals of schools, and they're going to do a whole lot of great things. That's what we're going to do. If we cannot vote, that's all right. We're going to do something equally as important. We're going to educate a generation of young people who can take their places in this world. And that's what they did. They concentrated on education. In 1917, Booker T. Washington persuaded Julius Rosenwald, who was a rich man from Chicago, a Jewish gentleman, rich man, convinced Rosenwald to use his wealth to help build schools in the South. They're called Rosenwald Schools. Some of you have heard of them, many of you have not. Go home tonight and Google it, Rosenwald, 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 and you'll be riveting, looking at the history of the Rosenwald Schools. More than 50 Rosenwald Schools were built right here in Halifax County. 20 or 30 were built across the river in Northampton County. My mother taught at one in 1922 over in Garrisburg. Rosenwald Schools were built in this community. They couldn't vote, but they were spending their time, energy, and money educating their children. And finally, as the years went on, the training schools were erected. That's why my uncle became the principal of the training school here in Weldon. That's why HBCUs began to grow. And that's why we now have a generation of educated young people who have now trained the next generation to become great and productive citizens. I will close by telling you about what happened in 1965 as it pertains to voting. Then I will really be done. In 1965, the Civil Rights Bill had just been passed by Congress, which made it unlawful to deny public accommodations to anyone based on race. What's a public accommodation? It's a hotel, it's a restaurant, a bus station, train station, airport. It made it illegal to discriminate based on race in public accommodations. Civil Rights Bill said nothing about voting. So Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. received the Nobel Peace Prize when he came back to this country after receiving the prize. President Johnson summoned him to the White House. This is Lyndon Johnson, not Andrew Johnson. He had been gone 100 years earlier. But Lyndon Johnson invited him to the White House. He said, Dr. King, thank you for all of the work that you've done on civil rights in this country. It was long overdue. Thank you. And Dr. King said to President Johnson, thank you. But President Johnson, we're not done yet. We need a Voting Rights Act. President Johnson said, I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. I'm from Texas. I know what you're talking about, but we cannot do that right now. I just got you the Civil Rights Bill passed, and I've lost a lot of friends over in Congress, and I can't go back to them and make them even madder with me. We've got to wait on voting. And King says, no, we cannot wait on voting. We got Black people in Halifax and Northampton counties, and in South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Louisiana. We got Black people in the South who cannot vote because of this literacy test going all the way back to 1900. President Johnson, you've got to do something. President Johnson said, I will do it one day, but I cannot do it now. Have a nice day. Dr. King left the White House very despondent. He went to Selma, Alabama, joined hands with my dear departed friend, John Lewis. And they decided we're starting a brand new movement. This is going to be called a voting rights movement. And they organized at Brown Chapel Church in Selma. I've been there many times. They organized and they began their march from Selma to Montgomery. And when they got to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, right on the edge of town, that's when they were met by state troopers. And there was nothing but violence, police violence against the marchers. And they turned back. 3 weeks later, they decided to march again. This time, President Johnson called the governor of Alabama, his name was George Wallace, and said, Wallace, listen to me. We have a First Amendment in this country. Those marchers have an absolute right to walk and to march anywhere they want to march, as long as they do it peacefully. And you have an obligation to protect them and not assault them. Keep your hands off of those marchers. And they said, yes, Mr. President. 3 weeks later, the marchers left Brown Chapel Church, headed to Montgomery, demanding a Voting Rights Act. And as they walked across the bridge, the troopers stood there and watched. By the time the marchers got to Montgomery, they were 50,000 strong. They were demanding a voting rights bill. On the way back from Montgomery, one of the white marchers, and there were white people in the march, not many, but there were some. On the way back, a lady named Viola Luizio, who had actually come down from Detroit to help with the march. She was forced off of the highway and she was murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. Because of that, President Johnson had had enough. He had had enough. He said, I don't care about this, that, or the other. I don't care about my reelection. He said, I want to bring in some new programs called Medicare and Medicaid. I want to bring in aid for college students and all of that. But I don't care about that. We've got to get African Americans voting in this country. And so he supported a voting rights bill. It was filibustered by Southern senators, but it was finally passed into law because of the Voting Rights Act. The literacy test is gone. Because of the Voting Rights Act, African American communities, now it's minority communities, have the right to bring a lawsuit if they feel that their vote has been diluted or that they have been denied the effective use of their voice, of their vote. A Section 5 was added, which said that before a county or a city can change their election laws, it has to be approved by the Justice Department. And so the Voting Rights Act was implemented and is very powerful. By this time, I am a young practicing attorney in Wilson, North Carolina. And a man from Halifax County walked into my office named Horace Johnson. Horace was a farmer over in Ringwood. And Horace Johnson said, lawyer, I just ran for the Board of County Commissioners in Halifax County. And they say I lost by 30 votes. And I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. I believe they stole this election. I said, well, it's a kind of serious thing when you accuse someone of stealing an election. He said, I can prove it. You go down there and look and walk in the office and you see all these ballots laying all on the table. I didn't believe the man. I've told his wife that, Carolyn, many times. I got in my car and came to Halifax, walked in the Board of Elections office, and all of the ballots, didn't have machines during those days, all these ballots just spread out on the table. And so we found that reprehensible. And so I filed a lawsuit against Halifax County to change the method of election in Halifax from at-large elections where you had to run the whole county-wide to district elections so that you could have a district on one side of 95 and another district on the other side of 95, and a couple of at-large seats for the Board of Commissioners, and we won that case. And that's why Halifax County now has a very diverse Board of County Commissioners. 4 out of 7 county commissioners in Halifax County is African American. 5 out of 5, correct me if I'm wrong, in Northampton County. And so don't you tell me that the Voting Rights Act has not made a difference in this country. The Voting Rights Act was made possible because of Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis and so many others. It's been a joy for me to talk to you today. I love this stuff. You can hear it in my voice. I love it, I love it, I love it. And my job is to make sure that young people and future generations know this history so that they can pass it on to their descendants as the years go on. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you so much, Congressman Butterfield. I believe that adding that you're a U.S. Congressman, a resident Superior Court judge, and being a justice on the North Carolina Supreme Court, I think we're going to have to add historian to that as well. Next, we're going to have a musical selection by Mr. Cofield.
We've come a long way, Lord, a mighty long way. We've come a long way, such a mighty long way. We borne our burdens in the heat of the day because we knew you promised to make a way. We've come a long way, Lord, such a mighty long, long way. We've had hard trials, each and every day. We've had hard trials, each and every day. We've had hard trials, each and every day. We didn't have to worry. You promised you would make a way. We've come a long way, Lord, a mighty long way. Right now we want to say thank you for making a way. Thank you for making a way. Thank you for bringing us through. It was all because of you, Lord. Thank you for making a way. Thank you for making a way. Thank you for bringing us through. It was all because of you. We've come a long way. such a mighty long way.
Thank you, Mr. Cofield, for that beautiful selection. We have indeed come a mighty long ways. Thank you, everyone, for participating in our lecture today with Congressman Butterfield. A special thanks goes to our program participants, and of course, especially our keynote speaker today. Roanoke Rapids High School Junior ROTC, House Productions, Caroline Harris, Sinclair Nicholson, Student Ambassadors, HCC Mentorship Department, and the Business Office for helping to make this program possible. Please join us for the many activities that we have scheduled in honor of Black History Month. We still have 2 more to go. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., we will be highlighting Native residents of the Roanoke Valley in healthcare careers. The deadline for Heroes is going to be this evening or tonight at midnight, so it's not too late to submit a nomination. And the program will be on February 24th at 10 a.m. in this facility. This concludes our program, and we thank you for participating in our program today. Have a great day.